anymore.
I don't know either. Are we taping now, or are we?
Yeah, it's on.
Oh, okay. Well, I should be funnier.
No, it's
yeah,
not.
no, it's not. There is no normal, I don't think, anymore. And I think we're gonna have to amend normal. And like, I think of your club and how much I love playing there. But then once you get upstairs, my recollection is the only airflow was to open those back doors that were kind of behind the back seats, which was, you know, two doors. And so I wonder about the configuration. Alonzo said you guys had people funneling right to the stage, which you can do at your club.
Right.
And then he was telling me guys are doing like meet and greets and doing merch on the road. And I'm like, I wasn't touching anybody for a while, you know, like I'm not ready to be hugging. I'm still elbow bumping people, and you know, that shoulder to shoulder shit doesn't work for me. You
No,
know?
we've been doing like merch and stuff outside, and last week was the first week we were like, all right, I guess we could try merch inside. We're still at, you know, a lower capacity. We're not even at 50% yet. We're at like 70 people. Then I go, I think it'll be okay. And the Jeremiah Watkins, who was the comic, he's like, I'm vaccinated, I'm cool, we can do it. But I still was like, this is nuts.
Yeah.
Like taking pictures, I was like, wah! I almost wanted to protect him, but I go, you know, you're a grown up. If you say you're comfortable, and everyone seems to be comfortable. So, but for the last year, or not even year, we were open. Let's see, because Alonzo was up here. I think he was the last one up here because it was in November before we shut down. Yeah. So we were open from June to November, and it was a constant struggle for me to be like, no, we're not doing meet and greets. No, if you want to do a picture, you can do it outside. We're not doing this merch stuff. Because I always can remember that whenever a comedy club got popped for COVID, it wasn't, oh, this comic was there. It was like, oh no, this place in Texas, they have no restrictions. It's what, and like
it was always Texas, and it really flipped me out that a bunch of different comics that we don't need to really go into all their names, but I mean, felt so wild and free that they could do that shit and even get it and then carry on going. And it's like, it's really irresponsible, man, in my opinion. I felt like everybody needed to like hunker down and do Zoom shows, and then like we'll come back, but like, well, you know me, like when we do the podcast there, you know how I talk to every single person and shake their hand. And I'm schmoozing, I'm cheek to cheek with people, I'm smoking joints outside with people, and I'm not ready for that for another year. I don't think, you know. I mean, I'll be cozy. I might take a picture, but not till later in this year. Like not till it gets to. I don't believe in herd immunity, but till more people are vaccinated, you know.
Well, yeah, I was thinking that actually when you say that, because this last weekend we had maybe the weirdest crowd we've ever had, and like they just don't know how to kind of be a crowd. They were very, very strange. They wouldn't let the comic get any momentum, but I think about, you know, times where you could come in and meet everybody, and you had like fans and everyone. It's a very community thing, and I don't know when that's coming back. Like, because that is a fun part of a club that, oh, I'm a huge Greg Proops fan, and I went to his show, and he gave me a sticker, and I shook his hand, and we talked about Marvin Gaye, and I smoked a joint with him. Like, that's a thing. So I don't know how important that is going to be coming up, because I don't think that's going to happen very often. But it's interesting to think about, like, how much does that go into the comedy club experience for people?
I agree, and it's the thing that I love stand-up. I think stand-up's really intimate. But the podcast, like you said, it's really a thing. People really, I have so many gifts. Like, here, let me just grab this one. This is from Portland. This is from the weekend after David Bowie died.
Oh, right, yeah.
A woman painted a garden thing into a David Bowie thing. That's from Portland. I have so much stuff, you know, it's such thousands of books and poetry books and comic books and just great. Every show we've done in Portland, it seemed like we did that one right after the election where we did Hallelujah, and that went on for 3 hours. And the one where Bowie died, and we did a 2-hour Bowie thing, and the one where B.B. King died, and we, you know, like every time I'm there, for some reason, I've killed someone. Oh, and what's his name? Adam Yauch from the Beasties. He passed away, and we did a podcast, and I played a whole bunch of Beastie Boys, and like, so. My memories are pretty vivid in Portland. It's very rare we do a show there where it's not some sort of emotional fever pitch where people are coming up to me and, you know, I mean, it's really fun. And the intimacy of that is something I'm going to crave. And it's kind of why I've lost my mind, I think, the last year. I'm a social guy, as you know, and reasonably schmoozy, and you know that I love to hang out after and
Right.
be the fucking life of the drunk party, but I haven't really had a chance to do it, and I'm too scared to put myself in a unmasked huggy situation until we get to late autumn, I think. Maybe next year. I'm gonna wear masks on planes and shit.
I mean,
I'm gonna do what
I don't trust. I
used to laugh at people for doing it.
I did too, and now I'm forcing people in the club to still wear them. Like now, it almost feels weird to not. But I will say this: the one nice thing I like about masks, and the reason why I hope they stay around for a long time. I mean, I've worked at a club for a long enough time where I can look at someone and be like, "You're going to be a problem, or you're going to be an issue." But now, if someone's nose is out, you're like, "Oh, okay, there's someone we might have to look out for." So it's a very cool indicator automatically of, "Oh, you're here for yourself."
Isn't it? It's astonishing how accurate the way people wear their masks will show you immediately where they're coming from. The below the nose is, I don't want to do it if it's a guy. And then there's the below the on the chin one, which is like, what? Then there's the I've got it in my hand, and then, oh, you want me to wear it thing? Like, yeah, I want you to wear it because there's a big sign. And the reason why is because we believe in things like medicine and Louis Pasteur. We believe there's a thing called inoculation, and that inoculation prevents a plague, and that humanity has fought against this ever since time began. And you're not getting with it because you want to live in, what is it now called, Western Idaho, the eastern part of Oregon.
I don't know. I don't even understand how that works. I saw that the other day in the news. I go, what is that?
It's a bunch of counties, the Bundy counties, I was there during the bird standoff. Remember, I was there.
Oh my gosh, you were. Yeah.
I was there during when the Bundys had that Native American bird sanctuary under siege, and they stood off with the feds, and the feds were afraid to shoot any of them because they know what happens. One, they're on their side, and two, if they shoot one of them, then there's a bigger shitstorm than if you don't shoot any of them. And, in any case, it's those counties are trying to section off and confedericize with what they perceive as Idaho's awesome whiteness or whatever that is their,
prairie home, a life on the prairie type stuff.
Right. It's I think one thing that this has done has been an amazing line of demarcation. I was saying it before the plague hit, but you'd hear me say it on stage. Things had got so bad that white people were concerned. And then after the last year with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and the giant movement and electing a black woman as vice president, electing Joe Biden as president, who has served in 2 administrations with 2 different black people. So this isn't lost on rednecks. It makes them furious. And obviously now we've reached a point where literally you've had to say goodbye to all of your relatives who live in this place and all of your relatives who live in that place. And we've all had to get into understanding why people will deny mass death and stuff like that, which is a really weird thing to me. I read about it. I read books about history and how people go into denial over these giant things. And it's like, we just lived through it. We're living through it now. People are still in denial that a lot of people died, and that's not a normal thing, and that we have to deal with that as humans. Like you said, when will it get back to people being able to be an audience again, be a group?
Yeah, I mean, my friend Jake had this funny joke where he says, 2020, we found out some people just won't believe in germs. I mean, like, why are we arguing about this? But it is a funny thing where you're like, are we going back? My cell phone does way more than anything that they had in the 1850s. So why are we back there in the thought process?
To not trust, I don't trust all science because a lot of science is run by people that I dislike intensely. But I do trust things like medicine and its efficaciousness, and the idea that literally when people say good old days, it only means because that the group that they belong to had a good old days, because that was a very limited scope. It wasn't really for everybody. And one of my old jokes is, we say Americans, and I'm like, you mean the Native Americans who we graciously let dwell on their native casinos? I'm like, we all came over. So to say you're an American, my friend Jeff Davis, I'm in an improv group with him, and he would say, what's your ancestry? We'd do a joke, and people go like Scottish or Irish or whatever. And the guy goes, he says, where are your ancestors from? And the guy goes, America. And he goes, my friend Jeff goes, really? Which tribe? Were you Algonquin? Were you Seminole? Let me understand. Well, no, man, American. He goes like, what's your last name? The guy's like, McTavish or whatever. You're like, well, dude, you're.
Yeah, I don't know how to break this to you.
Yeah, you're not from America. You're. So, yeah, I it's disappointing, but I don't know. I try to think about like Germany in the 30s or Cambodia in the 70s. Different countries in what was the Congo in the late 60s, early 70s, the conditions of madness where one person's trying to run the show and everything's going to shit in a shit basket and the money's being stolen and the country's just caught up. There's no breaking out of it. And I think we did a really good job of not letting them take over. It's tenuous, of course. The news wants to always play everything like it's touch and go. But the truth is, I think people really, really like Biden and Kamala or Harris and Biden because they're so responsible. They have a sense of probity. They're polite and kind. Like today, they went to the unknown soldier. They laid down the wreath. Joe went like this, which would be corny from anyone else, but he's a 79-year-old fucking Irish Catholic guy. He isn't fooling when he goes like this. Right. He's thinking about it. He's really, really thinking about what the day is about. And we haven't had that for 4 years. All we've had is the reality show screaming and yelling, the insulting and the racism, the homophobia, the encouraging violence against basically every group.
Well,
Latins, Jews,
right.
Black people, Asians.
That's where it's nuts.
Whatever.
It's like, for me, I've never wanted. Like, even when Barack got elected, I saw one black dude in Portland, and we both kind of get like, we did it. But it was a very, like, I don't need a whole lot of entertainment with my president. And it's weird to me that is a thing that anybody would seek. Like, I want a very boring guy or lady or somebody who's just like, yeah, I'm doing my job.
I think that's a condition of you being a mature, intelligent, considered individual who's able to use lateral thinking and stuff. I think with a lot of people who've been misinformed their whole lives, and I don't know what your family was like, but my presumption is because you're so focused, is that you had people who held you to things like you have to go to school and you have to learn this and you have to treat people a certain way because you have beautiful manners and a way with people that puts people at their ease. Where I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with the world, they're uncomfortable with their skin, they're uncomfortable with how they perceive they're being treated by their workmates and stuff. Right. That they think there's a finite amount of good in the world. There's a finite amount of stuff I can have. There's a finite amount of love, of sex, of drugs, whatever it is that they're all motivated by. And when someone comes along and gives them all these lies, that's when the Orwellian thing kicks in, of being able to hold two diametrically opposed ideas simultaneously and accept them both as truth. You know for a fact that 45 is a lying, cheating creep who doesn't believe in Jesus and would fuck you over as soon as look at you. And at the same time, you accept him as this violent savior because he says exactly what your id is desperate to say.
There it is.
And it's a difficult thing to understand about other human beings. It's particularly, and I think we've all found this, when you're adjacent to them, working with them, related to them, all of a sudden, oh, I didn't realize that was at the middle of you.
Yeah.
Because we accept it from, there's nobody in my family where there's more redneck uncles than you could count. There's also a lot of nice Christian uncles who are nice and aunties, but there's plenty of redneck ones. And, I'm just grateful a bunch of them are dead, quite frankly, because I didn't have to hear from them. I got people in my family who.
Yeah, you just gotta let it go.
One of them said to me, I said, you need to think about who you're going to vote for in a sharing, caring, avuncular way, because I'm an uncle, you see. And one niece responded and said, I got you. And the other niece said, the truth is there's two awful candidates. So I told another comic this, and they said, dude, that's progress. She thinks there's two awful candidates. You know what I mean? She didn't say, oh, there's one awful candidate, and then there's my guy, the one who's going to fight Antifa in the streets. So we've all had to sort through the detritus of other people's crappy belief systems. And that's what reminds me of Nazi Germany. I don't think in Nazi Germany, 80% of the population wanted to be violent Nazis and invade Europe. It was probably 25%, somewhere in there, 30%. And then everybody got caught up, like 4 years of this shit. I took over the court. I took over the law. I committed this act of terror. I scared you with it. I made this terrible thing happen where, having the police riot all last summer was built to terrify us, all of us. And that's when white people got on board and went, oh, this is a really bad thing. When police are allowed to be lawless fucking rioters every second of the day, white people finally got to see the face of that, which I don't think a lot of white people had ever dealt with. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think you're right. It kind of goes in sections. Like Rodney King, people were able to kind of say, like, oh, this LAPD shit, I had no idea. This isn't really good. And then, you cut to the George Floyd thing, you're like, oh, okay, this is. But if someone in West Virginia is telling me, well, I saw a documentary where they have like a real bad pill problem. If I didn't see that documentary, I would have no idea. I don't think of anything about West Virginia. But you have to sometimes see things that you would never see otherwise to realize that, oh, this is true, and people aren't just complaining or lying or bitching or something like that.
It's true. And even with the immediacy of all the information we have available to us over our phones instantaneously, people really do live in information pockets and bubbles. I remember years ago playing in North Carolina, and the crowds, what do they call it? The PhD triangle, right? Because Duke and UNC and I'm forgetting the other giant ass university are within miles of each other there. And the crowd's still rednecky. And I would say to the club owner, why don't you aim a little higher, man? You got fucking Harvard and Cambridge in your neighborhood. I go, have you ever thought about actually going to the colleges and saying there's a comedy club and that maybe the young people might gain something by engaging in the rhetoric that is comedy, which is an ancient. And he'd be like, well, and he'd take me to these redneck stations, and I'd be like, I don't want anyone who listens to this shit to come, man.
Yeah. Well, you've been like blessed with a very good platform in Who's Line, right? But this is going across everyone, like, from grandmothers to, grandfathers to nephews to nieces to, this side to that side of the country. When did you start to notice that, oh no, I'm not sure I like all these people coming to my comedy shows? Because you're a very smart person, and you're not someone who's like, hey, I think this is wrong, and someone's like, you're wrong. You're like, okay, like you know what I mean? Your opinions are based in very concrete evidence. So when did you start to kind of realize, like, oh, this is starting to bum me out, or did it ever?
Well, early on, and I think I've been able to keep audiences on the side of being awesome. It was at a certain point, probably in the 90s and 2000s, when a certain percentage of the audience knew why they were coming, and a certain percentage knew that I was on Who's Line, so they'd come, and then, as always, this many people were like, oh, I hate you now because you expressed an honest opinion, and you weren't the cute, funny clown that I liked on TV. And it gets down to what Jennifer and I were talking about today with Naomi, Asuka today, and Serena always, and let's face it, any athlete always, but particularly Black women athletes, they're always castigated and really scrutinized for their motives and what they really mean and all that. Whereas white, athletes are just generally assholes. And the reason why they speak in cliches is because reporters are dicks, and they're generally lazy, and they really don't try to be great reporters. There's a lot of good sports reporters. There's also a million guys out there that are just like filling out forms, and they'll take the easiest line. If fucking Asuka was not, she resigned for very personal reasons and very legitimate reasons. What was my point?
Oh, we're just talking about the
Think
crowds.
about what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah.
The crowds kind of, I guess, like being, I don't want to say shocked, but I've seen it where someone will come for whatever reason. Either it's, I heard this person on, blank, or I'm just here for a comedy show. But when it starts getting political, and I don't like saying that in like a derogatory way, but when someone starts giving opinions, whether left or right or whatever, you start to see a certain set of the crowd like, ugh.
Yeah.
And how do you maneuver through that? Or, I mean, I guess you're kind of like, fuck it, who cares? But
I am, but I do care, and
Right.
I'm also aware of that the delicacy of it. And each case is a separate one. Like when it's a big group of people, like I've had a complete January 6th sedition in the house after Schwarzenegger was elected. I was doing a gig at Caroline's in New York, and I opened up with some line like, "Now we have a Nazi rapist as our governor," and a guy yelled "No" in the front row, no, and I said,
No.
I think you'll find yes, I can do. And then in order to diffuse the situation, because it was heading south at 100 miles an hour, I got down on one knee and put my hand out to this asshole. And I said, let's do what not a lot of people are doing and agree to disagree. And what could he do? He was in the front row. So
Right.
he shook my hand. Then later, of course, I upset him to the core, and he stalked out. And he was followed by 30 or 40, what does Caroline's hold? A couple hundred, 300?
Yeah, I think it's like 3.
Yeah, people start streaming out. It was a Saturday Night Late or whatever. It was big show, and then people start streaming out after them. And fantastically, the other half of the audience that was ostensibly on my side started hectoring them. So as they left, Michael, well, fuck you, man. What? Just fucking fuck off, right? Why don't you go back to fucking, and then the other, well, fuck you. Like, so there was a running gun battle, right? So the show ends. It was the middle show. It was the early show. And it ends in like, a hubcap, dust. Good night.
Mm-hmm.
And I make for the dressing room, which is right around the corner. And my heart's palpitating, and 2006, whatever. This is middle of Bush, and I'm like, what? I've never had this happen before. Like this audience disintegrated, then reformed in two warring factions, and then had battle with each other, and I became irrelevant to the night for about 10, 15 minutes of my show. And then I finally was able to sort of rope them off with it. So Kenny, the manager of the room, walks in and he goes, Greg. And I go, yeah. Because I think it's going to be like, there's a dude out here with a, with a blunderbuss, right? He's got don't tread on me, And he goes, there's a bunch of people that want to talk to you. And I'm like, okay. And I go out and there's 100 people lined up down the hallway. So it was the honesty of the moment. It got away with me. I wasn't in control of it. This was the Bush era when there were people who were against the war, and there were people who were for the war. There were people who thought he was stealing and being dishonest and waged terrible atrocities, and other people who thought this is where we were supposed to be going.
Right.
And it's similar to 45 because the fascism was there and everything, but different because Bush didn't go on TV every day and call people stupid.
Well, I'm almost interested to see, so Lenny Bruce would say, cock or something on stage and get arrested. And 30 years after that, it's almost who doesn't have a dick joke at this point, right? Where they say dick or cock, whatever. So I'm wondering if in 20, 30 years from now, this whole we can't talk about the issues thing almost becomes obsolete to where everyone has an opinion that they can voice freely. Because there's still a lot of comics who I'm not going to talk politics or I'm not going to talk issues. I'm not here for that. And I wonder if in 30 years that's going to have to change.
I think you're prescient. I think it is. Very much so, because having the perspective of having been in the joint for over 30 years, I've watched it go from what it was to what it is, and what it is. And Pryor and Carlin were also arrested for obscenity. And there's awesome photos of each of them in cuffs with the cops running them from the comedy room to the police station because you know how subversive comedy can be. That speaks to the heart of America, doesn't it? That a person on stage literally doing the stupidest thing. We're not poets. We're craftspeople. You know enough comics. Some of us are artists. There are a few you'll meet in your life that really are artists. And there's a bunch that are just really noble practicers of a great profession, which you said, you know, Lenny Bruce. I think in 30 years, what I'm hoping for, I won't be here, but what I'm hoping for is it'll be the way the early 70s was to me, when Carlin and Pryor and Lily Tomlin started talking about real issues: racism, classism, alcoholism, drug addiction, homosexuality, the things that people were talking, guns, force by the military, the government being corrupt, all those things. And the million other comics that did it. Obviously, Dick Gregory, and you know, I'm leaving out everybody.
There's too many to mention.
Yeah, it took Dick Gregory a journey to get to where he could be completely frank. Carlin and Pryor as well. They all started one way. By the middle of the career, they hated that way and changed into another thing. And the generations after me will be able to do that thing and get back to that kind of brutal honesty. Because right now, what we're sensitive about is, now we're aware of how shitty everything's been. And we're aware that all the labels have really hurt everyone's feelings, and that all the diminishing of everyone and mischaracterization of everyone, all the short stroking of everyone, all the literal federal redlining of everyone who's not a fucking white Christian person out of the mainstream is vexing, terrible, and overwhelming. And we seem to be at a real crunch point with that, like I've never seen before since the early 70s, when we had Nixon and all that to worry about. And I think that's what art reflects. You're supposed to. And I think that right now people are, and there's this idiotic camp that's like, there's too much political correctness, so I can't say anything, I'm handcuffed, which is hilariously stupid, because it's exactly the opposite. As you said, we had to put people in jail so you can get up on stage and be a fucking dickwad and say the word dickwad.
Right. Well, and I
think they'll be hipper. I think they'll talk about more real things, more feminism, more intersectionality between gender fluidity, religious fluidity, international fluidity, and racial fluidity. I think are key to understanding what the next awesome comedy will be about, because it won't be as much about the divide as what it's taking for us to all reconcile that we need to acknowledge each other. I'm hoping that there's always going to be.
I mean, I'm in a weird little bubble because I'm in Portland. You know how
yes,
Portland
you
is.
are.
But like 10 years ago, if I introduced someone and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, you have a real funny comic. They're great. Please welcome to the," people are like, "Whoa, they what?" Like, it would be a freak out, right?
Yeah.
And that has nothing to do with the comic. That's just me using their pronouns that they wanted me to use. And now, cut to now, you know, 2021, no one thinks about that. It's not an issue. If you have a show of all ladies, it's not a problem. 10 years ago, it was like whoa, this is kooky. You know, and now it's not a thing. So I'm hoping that in 20, 30 years, we move and shift, you know, to, it's not an issue. Let's just keep it moving. Are you funny? Perfect.
Well, I mean, how many, you know, I say this and people make fun of me, but I think it's true. When I started in the early 80s, we didn't have Issa Rae and Tiffany Haddish and Mindy Kaling, and they just didn't get in. They didn't get a look in. You know, there was this many slots and there was that many comics. And that's a huge difference that show business would, even in its giant web of racism, would seek to make money from people who clearly were always popular. It seems intuitive, but of course it's not, because if you're not in the group that's making all the decisions, everything's counterintuitive. But it is progress, and I'm sticking to that. I'm holding to it. God damn it! The kind of insane ranting and raving I've done the last 10 years, I think wouldn't have found that big of an audience when I was in my 20s. In my 30s, I was in England in the 90s, and that's where I became a real sass bucket, because there was a real welcoming audience then of, I wouldn't say open-minded people, but people who had a little bit of understood. Their education hadn't been fucked yet in England. They were still a little bit smarter than us. They read more, and they were able to acquit themselves. When I lived there, if you couldn't write an essay, go on TV, pick a top 10 list, write your list of books you would take to your desert island, write a poem, give a recipe, show how you can make tea. Like, you had to be able to do all these things on the spot. Like, they expected you as a person to go, how much is a quart of milk? What's the capital? Would you write about your experience here? And they didn't. So all of a sudden, okay, or do a diary for us, which is a big thing. Do a daily diary. And so now you're a comic, but you have to do a daily diary, which they're all pretty loquacious about. They just can knock it out. You think, right? So I don't think that's as much of a stress anymore. And I was lucky to be in that atmosphere there in the 90s, because it forced you to be able to do all these different things and express yourself in a bunch of different ways, and then feel comfortable doing that. And also, being in a foreign country gives you confidence when you come back here and some hillbilly goes, I like the Second Amendment. And you're like, honey, we've heard from your side. Tell me when we haven't heard from your side, then I'm going to let you talk. But up until then, you don't get to talk because.
Yeah. Well, speaking of we heard from your side, so I think, and I don't want to, it's a weird topic, but I think you were ahead of the curve as far as like, we need women representation in comedy. And I think it's getting better. It's still not even close to how I want it, but do you think it's going the right way, or are we kind of not making improvement?
I think the sheer volume of women comics is forcing it to go that way. I also think that there's room for that improvement. The last couple of years, of course, that I've insisted that it be 2 women or whatever, and it sometimes doesn't happen, it sometimes does, which is, I think, weird. At different clubs, they'll give me excuses like, I can remember, I won't say where it was, but they were like, we couldn't find one. And you're like, if you ask the other woman on the bill, she might have known a bunch of other women. She might have a bunch of friends that are women comics, and she might have been able to get one to drive over, which always makes me laugh. We couldn't find one. Because all comics know all comics, especially openers and middles. And everybody knows everybody. When you're a headliner, you kind of go around by yourself or whatever, but they fucking play with everybody every week, and they know their town.
Exactly, yeah.
So I'd like to say yes. I won't play without 2 women on the bill now anymore. It still happens to me, and I have to lump it sometimes, which I'm not that happy about, but it's a real old-fashioned thing. And it's the biggest thing that's the difference between when I started. There was loads of women comics when I started, just not as many as there are now.
Right.
Not as many loads of them. And it's made comedy so much better.
That's what's always weird to me, is I think as you get more perspectives, it's a better scene. I'll never understand where it's like, let me get 3 or 4 people to have the same perspective. That's a dumb, dull hour and a half.
I couldn't agree more. I got tired of, it wasn't the men that I got tired of as much as like middle acts were all in their early 30s or whatever. And there was a lot of talk about activities that I wasn't particularly enthralled with hearing about on stage. And I thought, I have the power, a million, to like, just no, I don't want to hear it. And then all of a sudden you get all these women comics on, and look, now we're talking about the world and things and emotions and thoughts and mind, ideas and philosophy. And yeah, it's not that men don't, excuse me. And I think, by the way, having said that, I think a lot of the young men comics that I see are so much hipper than the comics I started with in the 80s. When we were in our early 20s, you could do sexist jokes and fat people jokes and, Chinese, I'm from the Bay Area, Chinese jokes, like Chinese jokes and shit, man, like just fucked up shit, and right. And so I think that's better. I think there's a big group of guys, and they're never going to go away. They're always going to be a part of comedy that run that, ranchero shit. Like, no one's going to tell me what to do. And my big way of showing that no one's going to tell me what to do is to be kind of a racist douchebag, as opposed to using, as they say in the movie Sid and Nancy, why don't you use that revolution for some positive change? If you're so angry and you're a white privileged guy, why not give voice to other people who aren't angry white privileged guys for 2 seconds, and then you might feel a little differently and not be so angry.
Well, yeah, and I think that like, and I, at this point, there's no boundaries on comedy. So I get it if in the early 90s, you're like, there's only 20 rooms. So I don't care I got to get, my friends or whatever on it. But now that you can work anywhere, you can put clips on Instagram, you can do it. It's like, let's get everybody better. Because for me, if someone sees a comic who's a woman, like, oh, that's funny, they're going to come to my club. And you know what I mean? It's like, let's reach as many people as we can. So I think it is a little short-sighted to be like, they're after everybody. It's like, nah, let's just have everybody do anything they want, and we'll see where it goes.
I think that's a beautiful perspective, and I think that eventually it goes that way whether they want it to or not. I find that younger crowds really don't make any delineation about gender, like you said, or it's just not a thing. They're just not that bothered. They're just be funny, and that's a big difference between, say, my generation. But the generation before me, kittens, Well,
yeah, that was on ABC. They were talking wild, man.
I mean, wow. It was. I remember on a comedy note. I worked with this cat in Chicago once, and I can't remember his name. And he did a very hilariously generic. He did the woman riding the horse during her period. She can ride a horse. She can do a hang glider. That commercial. And he did some other bit that was really patently obvious. And then he sold a CD after the show that was called, whatever his name was, Unleashed. And I said to him, I didn't say to him, he said to me, do you mind if I sell? I said, no, we absolutely don't mind. We're here to do commerce. Your livelihood is part of this experience. Please sell all you wish. And I said to the other comic, his CD is called Unleashed. At what point was he being trammeled? At what point were the fetters on? And he wasn't allowed to do the woman riding the horse with the period tampon routine. Because his comedy was so mild, man. It was like, what?
That Unleashed stuff is always funny, yeah, because it's like, I've never seen, like a Brian Regan Unleashed, where and he'd be like, whoa, you are unleashed. It's like, you're never in the pocket, man. What are you talking about? Right. Also, we'll do an official introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to Center Stage. We're here with the smartest man in the world, Proopcast and book, Greg Proops. Thank you again so much for coming out. I'm happy to see you.
Me too, Nick. It's really been lovely. Are we done, or are we?
No. So we're gonna do three more things. Yeah.
Oh, good.
So first thing I think you've been to almost all the helium. So we're gonna rank them. 1 being, that's nothing good comes out of that place, and 8 being that place is amazing. So we won't necessarily, you don't have to rank them in order. I just want to know 8, there's nothing I could change. 1, that place is garbage. And usually I ask earlier, but who cares? We'll just figure it out which ones you might not have been to. But I think you probably covered them all. So you've been to Philadelphia, right?
Oh, many times, yeah.
What do you think about that club? 1 being it's nothing good, 8 being there's nothing I could change.
Oh, there's so much I could change, but but I wouldn't. And the thing about that club that's been magic for me is there's a cat who works the door there who I'm pretty tight with, and the sound guy. I love the staff there, and like at Portland, I will stay with them after for hours and hang, and then toddle back to my thing. I love that club. Also, there's Philly audience is like the Portland audience is so polite and nice, and Nordstrom-y, I'm gonna get a tattoo, whatever, and I'm gonna ride a bike. And then the Philly audience is like, are you fucking talking to us? And you're like, yeah, it's a show, but they're still mad. And that's what I love about them. And so I can really lay into them, and it's a great room for me because me, if I can lay into the crowd, I will, and they love it. Because they're combative.
It's so funny. Yeah, because we're so opposite. But yeah, everything I hear about the Philadelphia crowd is like, go at them. And they're like, yeah, we are this.
The more you insult them and the more you beat them up, the more they think, oh, I can't intimidate you. I know. It's just a whole mindset, man. No, you just have to go hard the first 20 minutes there on them. And then they
and then they'll let you go?
Oh, no, then they're great. No, They do that East Coast thing that everything's an initiation on the East Coast, like you're joining the Warriors or something. Like what are we doing? We're forming a gang on a beach. I mean, it's always so weird, though.
Well, how about Buffalo? How's that club for you?
I've never played Buffalo, so I'm going to give it a 5. I'm going to put it right in the middle. I'm going to say their beef on a wax sandwich is probably one of the best in the state. I just made that up.
Have you done St. Louis?
I haven't, but I really like St. Louis.
We got to get you in St. Louis. Have you done Charlie Goodnights in Raleigh, North Carolina?
I did it before it was one of the big Happy Helium family. I did it when it was
I would have loved
Charlie
to hear it
Goodnights.
Before. Yeah, I would have loved to hear it before. What was it
and
like for you?
I did it when it was Goodnights, and then I did it way before when it was Charlie Goodnights. First time I played there, the guy who owned it was a good old boy. Very nice. Can't remember his name. And he drove me to some hotel in the middle of fucking nowhere. So I rang him the next day, and I'm like, I need to move into town and shit. And I'm like at a turnpike, and there's nowhere to eat and shit. And, I go, I need a hotel with room service and cable. And he's like, I don't think there's a hotel in Raleigh with room. This was then, because Raleigh was not on the map then. Like now Raleigh is a giant medical city. Like it's so rich. The downtown where all those skyscrapers are was a vacant lot with a car park in it with a crappy Hertz that was like a little outboard thing. And that's in front of the Capitol.
Right.
And I mean it. So that's when I started playing it. Then it was Good Nights, and there's graffiti on the walls. Had one of them dressing rooms. It was a complete cloister next to the French fry machine in the fucking bar. And everybody had written on the wall and shit. And you went out on the back to smoke weed. There was a giant iron fucking thing that was 5 stories. One of them fucking things that went down to an area where rednecks were drinking. And so there was always, that fucking, and then you guys took over, and it was, it was rocky at the first.
I mean, it's never easy to start a club,
especially. I like the room,
Yeah, I think we're lucky enough that if you get a good room, it'll be a decent weekend. Like no matter what else happens, it'll at least be a decent weekend if the room is set up and okay.
I've run into every manner of staff and customer there, and I've always enjoyed it. I think, like I said, Raleigh could be always exploited as there is such a learned crowd to be had in Raleigh. I've had some, I don't know. Yeah.
Find out the owner's name.
Stories I could tell you were we alone together. I might be more forthright in some of my hilarious Raleigh stories.
Well, I just found out the old owner's name was Brad Reeder, and that's about the most country name I could ever think of.
I knew him real well. Yeah. He was the one who took me to the redneck station a bunch of times. He was a nice guy, Brad. Me and Brad would drink after with him, his wife. We'd have drinks after. He was a nice enough fellow. I don't think he should have owned a club. I think he might agree with me since he got out of the business.
Right. Well, all right. So this is what I'm gonna call stories we've heard about you. So I'm gonna tell a story that I heard about you, and I'm gonna ask you a question about it.
Mm-hmm. I love this.
So, one time at press, the guys kept calling Greg the wrong name, and it was not a good interview. That's the worst question or the story I've ever had, but I'm very curious about press. I don't really talk about it much on this show. For you, do you think it's still relevant? Like getting up early, going to and now no one's doing that, but when we were doing it in like 2019, 2018, I don't know how much it moved the needle.
Oh, I don't think so at all. I think we were going through motions that people have been going through since the 80s. So 2 quick things. I know exactly what story that is because I know who told you that story. Because I know her. And I called her before and I said, don't make me do this. And she went, you have to do it. I really appreciate it if you do it. So on auto do it. So I did it. And he said to me, the DJ, you think we could be friends, Greg? And I said, we could if you never, ever spoke when we were together. And I said, you're as proud of your ignorance as if you'd raised it like a prize pony for 4-H. And it went really poorly. And so, yeah. So then a couple years ago, I was in another market, a very lovely market that I enjoy. And we went out to do all the TV and all the radio, right? And which I've done with the same woman, like with you. You and I have done it for years.
Yeah.
This woman in that market, her and I know each other for years. You know, she gets me a Starbucks. We spritz. So we do all the TV shows and all the radio shows and shit. And I go, can I ask you something? The same question you just asked me. She's dropping me off. So, do you think this moves the needle at all? And she goes, oh, yeah. And I go, well, let me ask you something. Last night at the show, before we did all the press and everything, I had 235 people there. And I hadn't done any radio or TV for it, just my podcast. And she goes, yeah, but that's your show. And I said, they're all my shows. The whole weekend's my show. Right. You're selling. My name is, there's my picture, look. I go, they're all my shows. That doesn't work. Like, I sold 235 tickets on a weeknight for 10 or 15. You know, I get the price. And we're doing that business. So now I put all those people through, and you didn't. And that's what her answer was. So I thought, well, she's just, she's got to protect her job.
Well, and I think it's harder to call now. Like, if you have a podcast, that's so much better if your fans are hearing you and then they're like, oh, you're in my city. And then I think there's still some people who, if they go on radio or a TV show, people see it and they're like, oh, let's go to the comedy club. And then they might not go for 2 or 3 weeks. I think that's what might happen with press. But it's so complicated, I think, where you don't necessarily know. I do know I've seen Natasha Leggero stand on this stage and go, I woke up at 7 a.m. Did anyone see me? Every show. And not one person was like, woo or nothing.
I think it's been that way for a really long time. And I think the impetus from clubs is television stations and clubs have a symbiotic relationship. They pay each other to do PR. And we're all in show business, and you have to keep the notion of it alive at the very least, I think. I've done it so many times, and knowing that it wasn't going to do anything. I always begged them to let me do the weather because although in Portland, there's that amazingly long chat show with the
right. We're doing like doing, 6, 7 minutes.
So there's no, talk about unleashed. They let you do anything on that. So then I'm happy. But when they take you on for interviews and stuff, I'm always like, let me do the weather because then I can riff, and then anybody that's watching will see that I'm actually funny instead of. Right. So when you're on Whose Line, how do you think of the things you make up? Or, whatever not that they're that bad, but you know how it is.
No, I mean, I'm sure there's some of them that are that bad. I'm sure it's 8 o'clock and there really are some that are like, why are we doing this? Because I've gone to some interview and I kind of like have gotten rid of them, but me and someone will go into a room, someone will have their arms crossed and they're like, all right, go ahead. You're like, we don't necessarily want to be here. Like we're trying to have a good time, have fun. Why are you acting like we're trying to take over your morning AM show?
Right? That's always weird to me. And also, and this is imperative, you're a guest, you've been invited on. Yeah, your PR people have offered you, but the station has 2 choices. It's very, very, very binary. Yes, please come on, we'd love to have you. And no, we're passing this time. We're not interested. And nobody's feelings are hurt, and that's how it works, and that's how everything works. And like, for them to bring you in, and I've had bees do that to me before. I've 1 or 2 times, I can remember a few radio shows where I've let the person know that I wasn't having a good time. But it's really not that fun, to be honest. And you really feel like you've done an unsuccessful radio appearance. It's much more fun if everybody's laughing and eating and whatever, and like keep it silly. I mean, it's the morning, goddammit.
Yeah, and like you said, if I'm able to see that and I see, oh, that's funny, I might more go to the show. One of my favorite things I ever saw, Todd Glass, he was like, oh, people, I'm going to run on when you say my name, because then people at home will be like, oh, what's going on? Something's happening. But there's so many things that he does on a TV show where he's like, well, this is fun for me. And if you like me and you're at home and you see it, you'll be like, oh, that's fun. I want to go see that. As opposed to, hey, how do you write your jokes or do you just go on stage? That doesn't bring anybody out.
Nope. You're right, though. And he's really good at connecting that part. I think one of the extraordinary things about Todd is the service of like how much he understands what the literal connection is between the audience and the people who are talking. stuff rolls over people, and they'll watch a whole night of comedy and then go, and I'm sure this happened to you, I really like that one comic. Well, which one? You know, he had like a shirt on it. And you're like, that's as far as you got? You don't remember anything, you know? And Todd's great at going, don't talk, don't take out your phone. We can see when you take out your phone. You think you're fooling us, but you're not fooling us. And then, like you say with him at the end, if you think I'm funny, click on my thing, then you'll want to come and see it and have part of fun. No, he doesn't leave that ground to be determined. And that's what makes him close it, I think. Also, like, every green room I've been in that he's ever worked in is a much better green room with better lighting because he was in it.
It's undeniable. The man is batting 100%. It's crazy.
His mark as an interior designer has left an indelible, I think, you know, frame on comedy, because suddenly shitty places where the ventilation was bad and there was no good couches, and they were ad hoc, like there was some dude, you know, down the street's couch. All of a sudden the furniture's better. Like in Portland, you know, you've got that cozy little lamp on the table, so I can sit in the couch and write in my notebook, or I can lean over and use the refrigerator, you know, like. And I know that he had that lamp put in and that table put in.
It's all him, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so now we're gonna do notes from the producer. So we got a couple of questions. I'll get.
By the way, Portland gets a 9. Is that a good score?
At this point, I'm getting worse and worse because too many people are giving. I don't know if it's because they're talking to me or if Portland's really that good, but I keep getting like, oh, Portland's an 8. So now it's like. My head.
I would record an album in Portland.
Yeah,
but also you offered me a terrible latitude with which to enjoy myself, so it's difficult for me not to have a great time there. Also, as I've always said, marijuana dispensary, bicycle shop, Italian restaurant. It's pretty much.
All the Italian restaurants gone now.
Oh, honey.
Now we have a tattoo shop.
Oh, okay, even more Portland.
Right. So. Yeah, like I'm gonna ask you 3 questions. I do appreciate your time, and then I'll let you go as much as. But so, what's the line, in your opinion, for the business, morals, and freedom of speech? So for me, I had one lady tell me I can tell comics what to say on stage, and I said, no, you're out of your mind. As a business owner, for lack of a better term, I'm not going to tell what a comic can say on stage. Do you think there's a line where you're like, we're not going to have this?
Well, it's a very, very important issue. And yes, with me, it's a matter of taste and good manners. As in the movie Lawrence of Arabia, he says to the Prince of Saudi or whatever, Lawrence, the English guy, is known for his mercy. Doesn't say it to the Arab Muslim guy. He says just about the white guy. He's known for his mercy. And he goes, oh, yes. With him, it's a passion. With me, it's a matter of good manners. I leave it to you to guess which is the more reliable. And I feel like some comics probably, if they're going to talk Nazi shit or be racist, I think that's too far, but that's me.
But I mean,
crowds love that shit, and Portland doesn't seem like an issue for me, because the first thing I do when I'm gonna play somewhere or I'm offered to play somewhere is to look at what they've got coming up, because it's the best way. And then if you see someone you know that's played there or is playing there, call them and say, what's it like? So when Portland Helium first opened, there was still paint on the walls when I played there, and a very shy woman who took people around in the morning for press and whatnot. And I said, you got to get one of the kids in your office to really get that Twitter account going. And she's like, really? And I'm like, yeah. That was when you guys first opened, yeah. Yeah. So I don't know that I bar people, but I'm never going to play a club where I perceive people who are that kind of. I don't, you know, I just think there's enough of that. There's always enough of that. Yeah. The world's that way. A comedy club should be a little more freewheeling, a little more fun, a little more inclusive. Like you said, why not let everybody do anything they want, and then we'll see what happens. Then the chips can fall.
Right.
Why give a voice to a hootenanny all the time when the hootenanny's had the bloody mic for, you know, since before there were mics?
Well, that's always, I guess, I don't want to say burden, but for me, if, let's say, hypothetically, there was some comic who was like, I'm just going to bash black people. That's going to be my whole hour.
Ooh.
And then, right? And then they end up selling out for 6 shows.
Right.
I don't know where I even stand on it, because you're like, well, I guess I got to move because everyone around me likes this. I don't know what that line is where you're like, well, we're not having this. Oh, but he sold 3,000 tickets. Fuck.
I don't know. I think there's a limit to it, and I think other countries have, like, for instance, in France, if you deny the Holocaust, you can be accused of that crime, tried for that crime, convicted of that crime, and fined and sentenced for denying the Holocaust. So you're not allowed to walk around and say, like you are here in the United States, because of the First Amendment, we allow people to come out and say there was no Holocaust, or there was no Armenian Holocaust, or slavery wasn't genocide, or bringing a Chinese over wasn't genocide when we did that, or the million things that we've done, subjugating Central America, the Caribbean, blah, 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 the Native Americans. You're allowed to say all those things. Yeah, right. You're right. You're allowed to say all those things. You're allowed to say they keep recasting slavery all these different ways, like instead of what it is. Like, no, there's not really a lot of ways to kind of recharacterize it. And so, yeah, I do think there's a limit to it. And I would always hope that America would kind of start to shut down the white supremacy outfits, your Scientologies, your belief systems that are espousing that stuff violently. Like, for instance, on the media, they don't have to actually give QAnon people a voice and treat them like they're normal mainstream people. They can say about them they're radical liars who are making stuff up that's really farcical, horrible, and dangerous. They can say that about them. That's still news. It's still news. It's still news to be analytical. There is an analytical base, and that base has to be in the smack dab in the middle of science and logic. Whether or not you're, as you say, you're a right-wing person, you're a left-wing person, logic and facts have to have an anchor somewhere. And when you start talking about blood-sucking vampires that are pedophiles, no. I don't have to entertain that. I don't, right. I'm 100.
All right. Is there anything you miss about the comedy scene in the 80s that doesn't exist now?
Oh, no. Only that my own youth and bravado. I was so sexy then and had such great outfits, especially when I was in a group. Then when I did stand-up, I let it tail off for a while. I didn't really pull it together to the early 90s. And that's when I started dressing better. The excitement of not knowing how shitty you were, I think, is always an exhilarating period for comics. And I was certainly there like anyone else. But as far as how the clubs were run and how people acted and how few women there were and how few mixed rooms and shit, I was really lucky to be in San Francisco. So I was influenced by so many comedians who to me are gigantic. Warren Thomas was one of my best friends. He's quite gone, and as someone I miss every day. Paula Poundstone was someone I used to play with, was a huge influence. Robin Williams, of course, Dana Carvey, Michael Pritchard, Jeremy Kramer. I started with, before even, Jake Johansson, like guys that you think of that are just part of like etched into the walls of comedy or whatever.
Right.
I started with all of them because I'm from the early 80s. And so in those days, you went to the open mic every night, 4 or 5 nights a week, and then you were scrambling to get a gig on a weekend opening or doing some shit. And I was in a team then, and I was really not funny. And then that broke up. I did an improv group. Then I came back as a solo, and then I got funnier. So I had a long evolution as and all of that happened in the 80s. And then what was the question that doesn't exist now?
I mean, for me, I don't think I would like it.
I wasn't
now.
that druggy, so.
Yeah, I think I would have liked it then, but being able to smoke in a comedy club, now it's but I think about me being, a manager in 1983 and just smoking a cigarette, like, oh, this guy's funny. To me, that's very romantic, and I think it seems cool.
Well, I was just going to say, and it's funny you said that. The one thing I probably do miss is, because I was is smoking in the clubs, because you could smoke and then here's a great bit from 1989. Will Durst would do this bit about we had a war between Iraq and Iran, and America was in the middle. This is during or HW rather, and he goes, we sold intelligence to Iraq. We backed Iran in the war, and we sold intelligence to Iraq and Iran. How does that work? And you go, put this gun in your pocket, and then walk all the way across the stage. He's got a gun in his pocket, and then light up a cigarette and walk all the way across the stage and go, he knows about the gun. And it took fucking 3 minutes, right? I did it in 2 seconds. All the way across, right? The y-axis. And he lit that cigarette. He took it out on the second beat. And then on the third beat, he lit it and he walked with a Zippo. So, right?
Yeah.
Click, click, right? No, And that one I always thought was great. And then he goes, what was it? Boy, that Ceausescu's trial, you could have had that during a lottery break, man. Nicolae Ceausescu was the dictator of Romania and was executed summarily on video in 1990 in front of the world. And they did have a trial, but it lasted about a day. Anyway, it was a terrible video.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very pleasant.
No, it was awful. Durst said, no, you watched a real dictator get aced, like in real time. And he had a palace full of gold stuff, and he had a secret tunnel that he failed to take. He failed to take the secret tunnel, got in a car, and a major ran him down with a unit of intelligence officers and was like, we're bringing you back for your trial. And yeah, anyway, Durst's joke went like this. Boy, you could have had Ceausescu's trial during a lottery break. Call it. Then you take out a cigarette and offer it. Just the taking out of the cigarette after yeah. Two great cigarette bits.
Oh, great cigarette
Bill
bits.
Hicks used to smoke really gloriously on stage, and he'd chain smoke and he'd stomp around, and then he'd run out of cigarettes or whatever. It was a bit.
Right.
He'd go to the front. People smoked those days. So he'd go, do you have a cigarette? People in front, no. You can fucking get a light and shit right from the aisles. And then he'd go, oh, a menthol. It's like smoking a cert. And then what was it? They say if you quit smoking, you get your sense of smell back. I live in New York City. What the fuck do I want my sense of smell for?
That's what I'm saying. In the 80s, there's so many cigarette bits. Like, the only person I've ever seen smoke now is Chappelle, and he can do whatever he wants. But Ron White's with a cigar. I think there's something, and again, kids don't smoke or whatever, but there's something very romantic and cool about the whole cigarette thing that I missed out on.
Dick Gregory, when he first started, before he became the health advocate that he became, was famous for chain smoking on stage. And his erudite, he wore a black suit with a really skinny tie and a close crop haircut. And he would wave this fucking cigarette around. And he was really erudite, And like, his smoking, I always thought was really sexy on stage. There was like you say, a lot of guys smoke cigars too, like you say, and especially the old-fashioned guys. And they even did on television when I was little. So like Alan King would come on, and Alan King or George Burns or Burrell literally would have a lit cigar in their hand, in their mouth, and fucking do it. Oh, Pete Barbuti was a jazz comic, and he had bangs and a little hipster beard. And he sat at the piano and he did hipster humor on like the Tonight Show. And he'd smoke a cigar, and then he'd take a plunger top and put it on his piano, and then put the cigar in it like that, and then pull it back on and smoke it. He was. They had every kind of I miss that too. I think it's there's a certain Lord Buckley has one album cover where he's wearing like a pith helmet and a tuxedo, and he's holding a cigarette like that, right? Like Nazi interrogator style. And
right.
And he'd say at the end of the show, Would it embarrass you very much, Lord and ladies, if I said to you that I've enjoyed walking in your garden? Yeah, just fantastic. The beatnik stuff, I see the 80s were cool because there was lots of funny people, but Bobby Slayton was so funny, and you know, everybody, but the 60s, I think I love the beatnik comics and that stuff too. Anyway, that's a long way of answering. Yeah, there were cigarette machines in the clubs.
Yeah, it's why I would hate it now, but there's a thing I think in the 80s no one knew, you know, and you were like, oh, it's health conscious or whatever. This is a doctor recommended cigarette. You're like,
well,
it looks so sexy.
The only time I really miss it is like jazz clubs. My wife and I were at a little jazz club in London a couple years ago, the 50th anniversary of Take 5 with Dave Brubeck, and the band was downstairs in this sweaty little hellhole. We're doing the whole album. Jennifer blagged our way in. We got to the thing, and the woman was like, it's pretty full. And Jennifer's like, look, we just got into town. She's like, all right, take the last 2 seats. So we squeeze into these 2 seats. This was the before times.
Yeah, I was going to say, it is.
I get to the bar, I get a beer or wine, right? I'm holding the beer to my head because it's hot, right? I got my coat off. I'm like, oh. And what was the point of this story? It started with such promise at the beginning of the smoke. Yeah. The smoke. If it had been 50 years ago, the place would have been literally thick with smoke. You wouldn't have been able to see the stage. And it held maybe 60 people, and we were butt to fucking butt, man. You know, everybody drinking, everybody having a great time. And I thought, I kind of don't miss it tonight. Although it would have been cool if everyone was lit, right?
Right, and then it's like, it's the haze, and you're like, ooh, you know, I walked into a
Miles
dark
Davis,
bar.
man.
So cool. God, I missed it.
James Brown, man. James Brown smoked cools with like marijuana in them before the show and shit. Like, it's just great.
So cool.
He did.
I know. It's like the whole cigarette culture was so amazing. Yeah. Putting it out, like it's. I got to figure out a way to do it.
Right.
All right. So last question, Greg, and then I'll let you go. Do you have a unique experience at a comedy club that sticks out to you, good or bad? Something that if someone, you know, hey, tell me a story you have, the first one that kind of pops into your head.
Well, I'll tell you the funniest one first, and then I'll tell you the most moving one. I was playing in San Francisco, and this cat was in the crowd. It was at the Improv, I think, in Union Square, and he was laughing at everything. And not just laughing, but like I think I'm funny, but like he was really laughing. So finally I like, okay, you're really, really having a good time. Can I ask you, why are you so amused by my humor? And he went, I just got out of prison. I was in San Quentin. And I said, really? Where were you? What were you in for? And he said, I was in tax evasion. I was in San Quentin. And I said, well, fuck me. And he goes, if you'd been there, we would have. And the audience exploded.
Lose it, yeah.
Exploded. And I fell over on stage, and I laid on the stage for a while. And then I got up and I was like, that was just, you know. So a couple months later, I'm in Walnut Creek and I hear har, 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 har. And I'm like, what? And I har, har, har. And I'm like, is it you? Is it you? And he's like, yeah. And it was the same fucking guy. And then I will say, and if I'm playing to the home field, I don't care. I did the podcast after 45 won. And I can say this now because it's like when your team finally wins the World Series after not winning it a bunch of times, because we won it with Kamala Harris as vice president. We really won it. Like, I can't emphasize to people how much of a win that is, looking at the terrain that we're looking at. That we have these people who are just and fair and kind, and put in a bunch of women and not white guys, and like they really made a concerted effort to make the government be away. In any case, having said that, the one I did there in between the time he was inaugurated, I think, and when it happened, it was like November, December that year. Right. And I was outside. And a psychologist came up to me. She goes, I've been doing triage for like the last week and a half. People are coming into my office and they're coming to pieces on me and they're unraveling. A woman gave me that. Oh no, it was different. No. Anyway, that show went on for 1,000,000 years, and I played Hallelujah, the Leonard Cohen song, sung by oh God, what's his name? I just blanked on his name. Jeff Buckley. Anyway, before that show started, I was back in my hotel room and I was so bummed out. And I listened to Hallelujah a couple times, different versions. And I sat on my bed and I bawled for like half an hour in my suit with my makeup on. And then I went to the bathroom and, like Jane Fonda on a private jet, I refreshed myself. And then I went down to do the show. And that show lasted a year and everyone stood at the end. And to me, that was a really moving moment because I really felt like not only do we air all the grievances and do all those things that we needed to do, it was just a terrible moment for all of us having to deal with what was going to come. And what came was, you know, worse than you could imagine. But on that night, it was really cathartic, I thought. And that, as a comedy club moment, it's kind of hard to top something that, when we were all standing at the end and everybody was crying and holding hands, that was like, I didn't manufacture it. I didn't make it out of show business. I said we were going to do it. We did it. We'd all been drinking, you know. I felt like it was a family thing.
I would say there's probably 2 or 3 moments I can think of in 10 years that I forgot I was working. That definitely was one of them. I remember sitting in the sound booth and and it felt, you know, I don't have a better term. It felt like church, where you're like, oh yeah. Shit, this is the Holy Spirit. Like we're caught up in this rapture. And it was, it was one of the most special times I could ever think of. And yeah, at 2 or 3 times I could think of where I forgot I was an employee, and that definitely was one of them.
I appreciate that. And I love the phrase church too, because that's how I feel. The best times in comedy literally are when it's like church, because the spontaneity is overcome by the sincerity of the moment and everyone understands it at once. And it's not a big intellectual thing at that point. It's a given thing, right, which is a more granted thing than an exercise in your ego or whatever. It's a shared thing, and that's what makes it so boss.
That's amazing. Well, Greg, again, thank you so much. I gotta hopefully get to see you soon. Is there anything that people should go check out? Anything you want to drop?
No, I'm largely retired now. I live on I live on an anteater farm here in Tarzana, California. I'm selling the Ford Seditionist. It's a new all-terrain vehicle that we take to the Capitol whenever we feel we're being disenfranchised. Now I got the podcast is out every week. Jennifer and I will probably record one tomorrow. I've got a couple shows coming up at the Nowhere Comedy Club. Let's see.
Oh yeah.
Ben Glebe and I are doing a show on the 5th, and then I'm doing Ed Asner's Poker Night on the 12th, and then the Proopcast is on the 18th. You can go to gregproops.com and find all those things. And I do a show with Ben Glebe. This is our 1-year anniversary. I think we riffed the whole thing. That's what's up. If you go to gregproops.com, it's there, and the Proopcast is there, and all that jazz.
Man.
Patreon, Cameo, you know, Instagram.
All this stuff. Just Google. People, you know, if you're watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, you understand how to find Greg. I would hope.
I hope so.
Well, Greg, again, man, I love you. Thank you so much for coming on in.
Too,
I hope to see you soon.
What a pleasure to see you, Nick. Thanks, man.